Welcome to a much better game. Megaman Battle Network 5 is the penultimate game in the series, and it introduces a brand new gimmick that we will never see again. While this game isn't considered to be amazing, it is, at the very least, an enjoyable game. This game also, as you can tell from the title, has two nearly identical versions. I will choose one of them to play as my main game, that being Team Colonel, because that is the canon version of this game, and I'll add in the relevant parts from Team Protoman where appropriate. However, I'll actually be playing them concurrently instead of consecutively like I did with Battle Network 4, so hopefully the video will flow a bit better. Anyway, enough with the talking, let's get started. The first boss of the game is determined by the version you choose, as will be the case with every dungeon boss in this game. In Team Colonel, it's Colonel. I personally didn't find this guy too hard. His targeted slash attack is a bit tricky to avoid because it triggers so fast, but if you're willing to take the hit, you can get a shot in on him before he strikes. Other than that, managing him is fairly easy. Just wait until he gives you an opening and take it. Now in Team Protoman, your first boss is Protoman, in his easiest encounter to date. He has just two attacks, his longsword and his widesword. Not the easiest to avoid, but not super difficult. Once you understand how to manage that, he's barely a threat. He still moves around fairly quickly, but considering the amount of targeted chips available at this point, this fight is trivial. So, the reason why this whole first dungeon even happened was that Barrel, or Chod, depending on the version you're playing, is putting together a team to take down Nebula. You know, the bad guys from the last game? Turns out Dr. Regal didn't die when he jumped off the top of a very high building. Will they ever explain how he survived? Well, of course not. Anyways, they couldn't advertise the formation of this team publicly, so they're doing it in secret. This whole infiltration of the Psi Lab was just a test to see if Lan was worthy enough. Now, this makes no sense because they attacked the fucking Psi Lab, but also this makes no fucking sense for Chod to do considering he has witnessed Lan save the world at least 4 times now. Oh boy, this is going to be a long explanation, so I hope you're ready. These are called the Liberation Missions. This is the gimmick I was talking about earlier. This is basically the devs trying to turn Battle Network into a quasi-tactical RPG. It's in these missions that you fight the bosses of the game. The dungeons are for your allies/team members. During these missions, you can't edit folders or use any items. To proceed, you have to clear the path of these dark panels to reach the Dark Lord boss. Oh, I'm sorry, the Dark Lloyd boss. You don't have to clear all the dark panels to fight the boss, but you do have to clear all the dark holes. To clear a panel, you have to liberate it, which means you enter into a virus battle. These are unique battles, as you can have viruses on both sides of you, and you only have 3 turns to win. If you happen to win in 1 turn, then all nearby panels will be cleared. So you can exploit the Buster Max mode here if you wish. One thing that's really cool here is that you don't just get to play as Mega Man, you get to play as any of your team members. This includes Colonel and the GOAT himself, Protoman. Now, these missions play out like a tactical RPG. Each side gets a phase. For each mission, you're going to have a target number of phases to complete the mission in order to get a special bonus. The first mission gave me the Navi chip for the first boss. But don't worry, afterwards you can retry missions as many times as possible, so turn on Buster Max mode and blow through them to get the special bonuses. I wouldn't say that I love these missions, but I don't hate them either. It is weird that they included this gimmick in a main series game and not in a spin-off or something. Now, before we get to the boss of this mission, I have to mention the worst part of the Liberation missions, being that all those battle rules I outlined above, well, they apply to the bosses as well. So you only get 3 turns to defeat a boss, which severely limits your ability to strategize. Furthermore, your custom screen opens as soon as the gauge fills up, so you can't even be careful with when to use your attacks. On the plus side, any damage you dealt to the boss remains after battle, and while they can heal, they have to wait until their phase to do so you can hit them with every Navi you have before they get a chance. So the folder setup for Liberation fights is going to be different from a normal boss fight. I'm focusing on targeted chips and AoE chips. You want to deal as much damage in as short of a time span as possible, so chips that can reliably do damage are key. This means that these boss fights are less about strategizing against the boss and more about strategizing against the arbitrary time limit, which I am not a fan of. Thankfully, you can fight the bosses in a normal setting via the random encounters on the net. However, those forms are very powerful, so I'll wait until later in the game to do those, but I'll place them below the initial battle in the video. Anyway, let's move on to the first boss, Blizzard Man. I didn't find Blizzard Man particularly hard to deal with. Most of the damage I took was the result of me fighting the time limit, trying to get my hits in on time. He has 3 basic moves. He'll kick some snowballs at you, this can catch you off guard while you're trying to fight the time limit. He'll blow some ice breath at you, this is a non-factor, and he'll roll towards you while dropping snow piles on your side of the field. That last move is the only move I found annoying, because the snow piles that fall from the sky can trap you. But as long as you have the aforementioned chip set up, you should be able to deal with them in 1 phase. Fighting him regularly isn't particularly hard either, especially now that you can be more conservative with your strategy. This fight is practically the same as the first fight, except now he has more health, but he's not any more difficult because of it. If you load up with electric element chips and or spam the Toad Soul or Magnet Soul's charge attack at him, this fight is a breeze. I want to note the difference between the two allies you get in the next chapter. In Team Colonel, Princess Pride was simply mining materials on her own for her country, as princesses are wont to do, and her navy went out of control. Meanwhile, in Team Protoman, this woman is just operating a piece of heavy mining machinery on a deserted island because she needs to let off some stress. And when she's informed that Lan's friends are in the room that she's drilling into and rocks are falling on them, she just refuses to stop. No good reason. She's just going to escalate this to murder because she's mad. And of course, everything is right as rain by the end. It's good to know that after all that has happened, attempted murder is still A-okay in the Battle Network universe. So as you could probably tell from the earlier paragraph, we're in for a rematch with Nightman from Battle Network 2, and he is almost a one-to-one copy of his Battle Network 2 encounter, except now he does this jump and slam move much earlier, and he takes 0 damage in his stone form instead of 1 damage. This fight was pretty easy in my opinion. He is static for most of the fight, and controlling what attacks he uses is just as easy as his Battle Network 2 form. If you stand in front of him, he'll shoot his spike ball at you. If you stand anywhere else, he'll shoot it upward and cause rocks to fall. The only trouble I had was getting trapped behind broken panels, but that was just the result of my idiocy. Now in Team Protoman, you'll get another Battle Network 2 rematch, Magnet Man. And he is so much harder than his previous encounter. I had so much trouble with him. I definitely didn't nearly one-shot him. But seriously, he's actually much easier than his Battle Network 2 form, as the mag panels spawn at all 4 corners rather than a straight line. This makes navigating the field much easier, as well as managing his attacks much easier. The only real threat is the static hole that spawns in the center panel on your side. This can absolutely catch you off guard and trap you if you're not careful. And now we move on to the second Liberation mission boss, Shademan. Again, except this time you actually get to fight him for real the first time, no out-of-the-way side quests or any of that nonsense. I actually struggled quite a bit with this guy, and actually failed the Liberation mission, because not only does he deal a lot of damage in battle, but he can deal a lot of damage out of battle as well. Shademan darts around, and his attacks can not only deal large amounts of damage, but they can also stun you. So this is a fight that requires patience and timing, and that is something this system does not allow for. And what that leads to is a lot of mistakes while trying to fight the time limit. The regular match with Shademan is much better. He's fast and he's aggressive, and that means you have to be aggressive as well. If you're paying attention and not being greedy like I was, you'll notice that he gives you plenty of opportunities to deal damage, just gotta be fast with it. This is a fight that requires cautious aggression. Don't get too greedy and he'll be down in no time. Next up is our first optional boss of the game, Gridman, Mr. Famous's 4th and final Navi in the series. This guy is deceptively easy. While he does a lot of stuff to keep you busy, like constantly summoning clones of himself or throwing a football that bounces around on your side of the field, often both at the same time, it's actually very easy to manage that. Damaging him is easy as well, as he gives you plenty of good opportunities to hit him. The only thing you have to worry about is one of his clones getting in the way. As long as you don't get too aggressive, this guy shouldn't be a problem. Can I just say I hate how much this chapter made me backtrack? Not only did it make me trek through the entire internet map twice, but it also made me go back through the entire first dungeon. God damn! Anyways, next up we have another Battle Network 2 rematch, Shadow Man. And much to my disappointment, this fight was almost mindlessly easy. He's basically the same as he was in Battle Network 2, except weaker. He only spawns 1 clone instead of 2, which makes all of his moves easier to dodge. The only real attack that can catch you off guard is the one where he teleports behind you, and even then he doesn't do enough damage to actually make him feel like a threat. Plus, he only has 500 HP. That's only 100 more than the first boss in the game. And we're on Chapter 3. I'm not one to complain about a game being too easy, but I was hoping for more from this guy. Now in Team Protoman, we get a brand new character to the series, Gyro Man. Gyro Man is only slightly more difficult than Shadow Man, mainly because he is quick and his favorite attack, his helicopter blade, tracks you, so it's not as easy to dodge. It's also the only one of his moves that's actually a threat. Everything else is very easy to predict and avoid. This fight is more about resilience than anything else. Just be patient and wait for opportunities to open up and you should be done in no time. Fuck this guy. The next Liberation boss is Cloudman. I hate Cloudman. Cloudman is a dick. Okay, realistically, he's a simple fight. He's basically Thunderman from Battle Network 2 with extra steps. The main gimmick is that you have to destroy these clouds while dealing with the thunderballs they're shooting at you while trying to find a good opening to deal damage. That's not terribly hard, it just requires a lot of patience. But you know what doesn't allow for you to be patient? The damn time limit. This guy would not be nearly as hard if you could just take your time. But because of the stupid, arbitrary limit they put on you, this fight becomes a headache and a half. His regular fight is a headache as well, except you have the time to wait for opportunities to present themselves rather than trying to force them, which makes it a different kind of frustrating. Now it's a tedious routine of destroying the clouds and trying to get a hit in before they reform. Of course that's easier said than done, because they reform fast and Cloudman is moving back and forth quickly as well. Plus you gotta deal with the clouds spamming the thunderball attacks at you. Straight line chips are just about useless for this fight. You have to focus on stuff that can be thrown to the back row, like the Quake and Crack Bomb chips. Side note, did not appreciate them nerfing the Quake chips. Also, any wood element chips you feel confident will hit reliably are also good here. This fight just requires you to be patient and calm. Just keep your wits about you and he'll be done in no time. So, for this next chapter, you actually get to play as Colonel, or Protoman, as Megaman's been kidnapped. It's actually a pretty cool thing. The only downside is that their HP is set and can't be increased, which can be a liability at times. When I was a kid, I could not for the life of me figure this code out. I actually went to GameStop to get the official guide the day before vacation so I could get past this part. This was, of course, before the days when everyone had Wi-Fi. This time, I figured it out by reading the hint twice. I was a dumb kid, wasn't I? Fun fact, in the original GBA release of these games, there were only 3 sections of this dungeon, but the DS version had 4. I always thought that was some weird addition they did for the DS version, but actually, the GBA versions always had the 4th section. It was just that the localization had to remove some maps for some reason. Anyways, the Legacy Collection restores the original maps, and I was very confused for a second. The boss of this dungeon is Tomahawk Man. I didn't find this guy to be much of a threat. He has a few attacks, most of which are easy to manage, his Tomahawk Boomerang, his Impact Attack, and the Totem Pole, which shoots meteors at you. The Totem Pole acts a lot like Flame Man's candles from Battle Network 3. One face shoots the meteors, another heals them, and another grants him invulnerability for a time. None of this is difficult to handle, and even if you get hit, it doesn't feel like something to be worried about. You just gotta stay patient and capitalize on the opportunities he gives you, and you'll have him down in no time. In Team Protoman, you'll face off against Napalm Man instead. He is actually a returning character from Battle Network 1, as he's one of the post-game fights. I always wondered if this means his operator used to be a member of World 3, or if he was operatorless before. Anyways, this fight isn't that hard. It just requires patience. These turret guns continuously pop up in the front row, and they'll be your most prominent threat. Napalm Man himself will launch bombs at random panels on your side, and occasionally he'll drop a bigger bomb on you. Both of these are easy to play around. Your priority is dancing with the guns, and that isn't particularly hard either. This is a fight that wants you to take your time, not unlike Burn Man from the last game or King Man from Battle Network 3. Dance with the guns, avoid any incoming projectiles, and wait for an opportunity to present itself. If you're patient, this fight should be easy. Moving on, the next Liberation boss is Megaman. Yep, Dark Megaman makes his second appearance in the series, and he's pretty easy. He's basically the same as Battle Network 4, except he's a bit slower, but his behavior is the same. He spams attacks at you without rhyme or reason, and while this makes avoiding damage hard, it also makes dealing damage easy as Megaman has zero survival instincts. So the strategy is the same as the last game. I just matched his aggression and it felt like a cakewalk, honestly. This is the only Liberation boss where I didn't have to use all my party members to beat him. Easiest in the game so far. So let's take a second. Okay, it'll be longer than a second. Let's talk about Dark Chips and the Chaos Unison. So Dark Chips are a little different in this game. They aren't chips that appear situationally as in Battle Network 4. Instead, they're chips you can add to your folder and use just like any other chip. Of course, you have to get to the point in the game where you can use Dark Chips before you can make use of them, which is this chapter. Along with that, they also included the Chaos Unison mechanic. This is when you use a Dark Chip to perform a Soul Unison, allowing you to create a Dark version of that respective Double Soul. This only lasts one turn, but your charge shot becomes whichever Dark Chip you used. Or your Dark Soul switches sides and joins the fight against you. Thanks, guys. This mechanic is interesting. It doesn't prevent you from using the regular Soul Unison in the same match, and it doesn't give you any of the negative consequences of using Dark Chips. However, it's not so beneficial that including Dark Chips in your folder is worth it unless you plan on using them in battle, and even in that scenario, you'd get more use out of the chip in battle than by using it for the Chaos Unison. I've been dreading this moment ever since I started the game. Hell, ever since I started Battle Network 1. This is the single worst part in any game in the series. Worse than the ice-breaking part in Battle Network 2, worse than anything Battle Network 4 threw at you. This little minigame actually made me give up on the game the first time I played it. So what is this minigame? Well, you have to defeat 100 of these mannequins that come at you with increasingly quicker speeds. If you get hit once, you lose. Now obviously that in itself is annoying, but it can't be that bad, right? I mean, it sounds as simple as it can get, just press in the direction they're coming from and swing. And if they had made it like that, I wouldn't be complaining as much. But they couldn't make it that easy. No siree. See, you actually have to move diagonally for land to move in the direction you want, which is stupid, unnecessary, and tiring on the thumb. And if you don't press the buttons just right, land might not move at all. This of course makes the parts with the fastest enemies much harder and nerve-wracking than they need to be. But still, that can't be the worst part in the series. Surely some of the minigames in 4 were worse. True, except anyone who has used a Game Boy Advance or a Game Boy Advance SP, the system these games were originally released on, you'd know that the D-pads on those systems were pretty simplistic. You could go in one direction, but hitting 2 directions at the same time was something it simply did not like. It would just pick one of the 2 directions you're pressing down on to go in. So if you're pressing over and down, it might just end up going either over or down. And that little thing made this stupid little minigame almost impossible to beat, as hitting those buttons in the right, precise way was exceedingly hard to do. Now granted, this game released in 2004 and the DS released the same year, so no doubt many beat this using the DS's more responsive D-pad, including me. It wasn't until I got the DS version of this game, which apparently has been forgotten by Capcom, that I was able to beat this. Now, on a PS5 controller, it's a lot easier as the D-pad is much more responsive. Not to mention you also have an analog stick, and I'm thankful for that. This is not the roadblock it used to be. But what in the world were they thinking with this? And the fact that they never fixed it is just crazy to me. Oh, and the following dungeon is padded out the ass. You have to pick the right color ninja prog or progs to disarm the traps to continue through the dungeon. But they didn't stop there. They added a bunch of superfluous rules to make getting the right color progs much more annoying than it had to be. So simply put, this chapter can kiss my ass. The boss of that dungeon is Numberman. Again. Fun fact, he's the only character outside of Gutsman and Protoman that you fight in more than 2 games. Numberman is much more like his Battle Network 1 form than his Battle Network 4 form, which means he's pretty easy. His number balls are again your one and only real threat. They move slow and are easy to destroy with a simple charge shot. His 2 other attacks are almost effortless to avoid. So as long as you have enough stuff that can hit the back row and stuff that can target Numberman, this fight won't be too hard. Now in Team Protoman, we get the second appearance of Searchman, still spelled without the A. And boy is he easier this time. He's much slower, doesn't hide in any holes, and there's no boulders on the field, so dealing damage is much easier. The only real issue for me was his sniper attack, and only because of how fast it triggers. The rest of his arsenal is only a threat if you get greedy. Just focus on targeted chips and AoE chips, keep some straight line chips and swords handy for when he gives you the opportunity, and you should be done with him pretty quickly. The next Liberation boss is Cosmoman, one of the cooler looking navies in the series, and probably the second easiest Liberation boss so far. His main attack is shooting little planet rings at you, and they're not a big deal even if they hit you. He'll also spawn conveyor belts of planets fairly often, and these make the match last longer, but they're also not much of a threat. The real threats are the planet laser and the projectile spread. The laser can easily catch you by surprise, and the projectile spread is... well, it's a wall of projectiles. When is that ever easy to dodge? However, it's actually fairly easy to get a field advantage on him, and I think that reduces how often he uses certain moves, because he rarely used the latter 2 moves in my Team Colonel match. In fact, he didn't even use the projectile spread, whereas in my Team Protoman match, where he had field advantage, he was much more aggressive. But either way, he isn't particularly difficult to manage, just don't get greedy and he should be down in no time. Now in his regular fight, Cosmoman is definitely a bit more dangerous, though surprisingly he doesn't use those 2 other attacks more often. I guess that's just how he's programmed. His arsenal remains the same, except the ring is now more frustrating and the conveyor belt spawns a planet in the middle lane, making it nearly unavoidable unless you destroy the ring around it first, which needs a charge shot at the very least. Problem is, you have to dodge the other 2 planets in the process. But the strategy is the same as the first fight, just don't get greedy and you should be good. Next up is Toadman, returning from Battle Network 2, and he's pretty much the same as he was then, only now he has this bouncy frog thing that creates water panels, and occasionally he'll jump out of those water panels and frog slap you. That's about all that's different about him, so if you play Battle Network 2, the strategy is still the same. He jumps between these two lily pads, and he'll jump to the other one the second you get in front of him, so simply trigger his lane change first, then strike. It's a pretty simple rhythm once you get used to it. The only things to watch out for are his aforementioned frog slap, which definitely caught me off guard a few times, and his frog song, which can stun you. The latter has an easy to understand pattern, but it's also easy to fuck up and get hit by it. Now in Team Protoman, you get an insanely easy fight with newcomer Meddy. By the way, she is the second female Navi in the series, third if you count Ring from Battle Chip Challenge. Meddy is as easy as they come in these games. Her main attack is that she lobs these pill bombs at you, and depending on the colors, they'll inflict a status effect on you. Some do regular damage, others will blind or confuse you if they make contact. These things are effortless to dodge, not just because you can easily move out of the way, but also because their explosion patterns are the same every time, making it easy to know which panels will be affected. In fact, they're so easy to avoid that I had to purposely get hit by one of the pills just to see what it did. She has one other move, and this one is an actual threat. Kinda. She summons these red and blue dummies. They don't damage you, but they're hard to destroy. I don't even know if you can destroy them, I was never able to. After a short period of time, they'll explode, hitting every panel on your side. This attack is almost unavoidable, so it's a good thing she's not difficult, otherwise that could have been a real concern. The next Liberation boss is determined by the version you're playing. In Team Colonel, it's Dark Colonel, and damn is he tough. He moves fast, and he's hard to hit, but your biggest concern is going to be the targeted slash attack. This thing does a lot of damage, and it triggers so fast that by the time you see the highlighted panels, it's already too late. So trying to effectively deal damage while trying to beat the time limit and dodge his assault is hard. Just hard. You need to fill your folder with every AoE chip and every targeting chip you have. Do not think for a second he'll stay long enough for you to hit him with anything else. So it should go without saying, he is the hardest boss so far in the game. Now in Team Protoman, you obviously get Dark Protoman instead. And finally, for the first time since Battle Network 3, we get a decent Protoman fight. Protoman moves slower than Colonel, but he attacks much faster. He has his usual arsenal of attacks, his basic wide sword and teleport attacks, but now he has his shadow clone to help him make things harder for you. His shadow can teleport attack, and later in the fight, he and his shadow will gang up on you. But if that wasn't enough, his shadow can also occasionally shield him from attacks. While Protoman moves slower than previous versions, he's still fast enough to make most clips unreliable. The only time he stays still for more than a few seconds is when he's attacking, and you do not want to take the hit, as he deals massive amounts of damage per hit. Multiple of my Navis got one shot by him. So the strategy is the same as with the Colonel fight. Focus on AoE chips and targeted chips, basically anything that has a low chance of missing, then hope for the best. He's not as hard as Colonel, but he's still the hardest boss in his version by far. Next up, we have one of the few optional bosses in the game, Larkman. Larkman is an oddity in the series in that he's located in an out-of-the-way part of the Undernet, only accessible via End Area 1, and he has no relevance to the game otherwise. He's also fairly easy as long as you're patient. His main attack is a boomerang attack, and that can catch you off guard if you don't guess which direction it's going to turn, but that will pretty much be your biggest concern through the fight. He has two other attacks, and both are much easier to dodge. Both are swoop down attacks, and while one tries to trick you as it doesn't highlight the panels it hits, process of elimination makes it easy to figure out which one he's doing. The trick to this fight is to remain patient and not get too aggressive. Openings are frequent and easy to capitalize on, so if you're paying attention, this guy shouldn't be too hard. And now, we move right on to the final boss, Nebula Grey. That's right, no double final boss fight this time. Nebula Grey has a lot of parallels to Duo from the last game. They can't be damaged unless you hit the little flame that's orbiting around them. As long as the thing is in your sights, there's a way to hit it, but sometimes it moves quicker than you'd expect and you end up missing. The back two rows are gone, and anything that needs those rows to be there is useless. You also can't use Dark Chips, nor can you use the Chaos Unison unless certain requirements are met. I don't know what those requirements are because I can't find anything that tells me what they are, but I saw plenty of posts saying they beat it using Chaos Unison, so there has to be some way to do it. But whatever. Nebula Grey will constantly spam attacks at you, the most common being this flame thing that pops out of the ground. This is not hard to dodge, but they use it so often that it can easily get in your way when you're trying to deal damage. It'll also shoot this circling flame attack at you, and that's pretty easy to dodge once you understand the pattern. The most difficult moves it has are when it throws its body at you and cracks a bunch of panels. This makes the battlefield hard to navigate for a bit, and the Rain of Hands, which is the most problematic move it has. This is a fight that requires you to be on top of your game 100% of the time. If you're paying attention, dodging its onslaught isn't exceptionally difficult, but one misstep and you could find yourself getting pummeled. Chips that hit more than once, anything that can target the flame, and of course AoE chips will all be good here, and personally I found the Toad Soul and Tomahawk Souls very useful as well. This isn't the hardest final boss, far from it. I'd put them just below Gospel honestly, but it's still a pretty fun fight. And that was Megaman Battle Network 5. This is not a bad game. The plot is well written, it's definitely one of the more intriguing plots they have. I feel like they really built on the mechanics they introduced in Battle Network 4 in a positive way. But I think its biggest detriment is that it's very forgettable. In fact, I remembered less about Battle Network 5 than I remember about Battle Network 6. And I haven't played Battle Network 6 in almost 20 years. But at least it wasn't the headache that was 4. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you feel so inclined to do the algorithm-engaging things like commenting and liking, please do. If you want to subscribe, that'd be great, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video.